Hi, my name is Harper. I'm 31, living in Seattle now, and today is supposed to be my housewarming, my first real celebration for a place that finally feels like mine. I was walking through the great room of my mountain estate, watching the camera crew set up lights for the TV segment, when my phone buzzed. A text from my mother flashed across the screen. "We won't make it to your housewarming. Your sister needs some groceries. She's stressed. You understand, right?" I stared at it for a moment, that familiar sting rising in my chest, the same sting I'd felt at my graduation, my first pitch presentation, every milestone they'd skipped because Brianna needed something more urgent. I typed back the only reply I'd learned to give. "All good. Don't worry." What they didn't know, what they had never even bothered to ask, was what my home actually meant now. That the place I was standing in wasn't an apartment or a rented cabin, but a $5 million mountain estate spread across 40 acres of pine, wrapped in glass walls and a view so vast it could swallow the sky. And in a few days, it would be featured on one of the biggest mountain architecture shows on national television. Once the episode aired, my phone did something it had never done before. It wouldn't stop ringing. If you've ever been treated like the afterthought of your own family, tell me where you're listening from. So, I know I'm not alone. I grew up in a small town in northern Oregon, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and where appearances mattered almost as much as Sunday service. My parents were the classic image-conscious middle-class couple. Dad ran a modest insurance office on Main Street. Mom coordinated every PTA event like she was planning a royal banquet. They weren't cruel people, not in the obvious ways, but they lived for the shiny surface of things, polished smiles, perfect kids, perfect family photos. And in their eyes, only one of their daughters truly fit that picture. Her name was Brianna. Brianna was everything they loved putting on display. Bouncy golden curls, a smile that teachers adored, the kind of kid who could blink twice and suddenly receive applause. Even as little girls, when neighbors asked who we were, my mom would beam and say, "This is Brianna, she's our sunshine," then gesture vaguely toward me. "And this is Harper, Brianna's sister." Not Harper. Not the girl who liked sketching buildings in the margins of her notebooks. Just the accessory to their favorite child. I learned early that in our house, Brianna was the headline and I was the footnote. The first time the hierarchy became painfully clear was at Brianna's 12th birthday party. My parents turned our entire backyard into a pastel wonderland. Balloons, confetti cannons, a rented cotton candy cart, and even a girl dressed like a fairy handing out wands. When Brianna walked out, everyone clapped like she was stepping onto a pageant stage. Meanwhile, I sat on the porch steps, watching the swirl of pink and glitter while clutching the small envelope I'd saved for weeks to buy her a gift. A set of gel pens I knew she wanted. When I handed it to her, she barely looked at it before tossing it aside and running off to open the mountain of boxes piled behind her. At the end of the night, as parents were packing up their kids, my mom realized she hadn't given me anything. She grabbed a last-minute leftover goodie bag, the kind filled with dollar store toys, and pressed it into my hands with a distracted smile. "You're the older one. Be understanding." I remember nodding, swallowing the lump in my throat, and telling myself it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than I knew at the time. The years that followed taught me the same lesson in dozens of small, cutting ways. In 8th grade, I won first place in a statewide design contest, an actual, judged competition where hundreds of students submitted blueprints for community structures. I spent weeks creating a model of a lakeside reading pavilion, cutting balsa wood pieces until midnight, hot glue burning my fingertips. When I brought the trophy home, beaming, my parents barely looked up from their conversation about Brianna's upcoming school musical. Dad glanced at my design poster for maybe half a second and said, "Nice work, sweetheart," before turning back to Brianna. "So, do you know your lines yet? We should practice tonight so you're perfect for the crowd." Within minutes, any recognition I might have received evaporated like breath on cold glass, and as Brianna twirled in the living room practicing her stage entrance, I quietly carried my trophy upstairs, placed it on my shelf, and lay on my bed trying to convince myself I wasn't jealous, just tired. One summer later, when I begged to attend an architecture camp in Portland, a 2-week program I'd dreamed about since 5th grade, I finally said the words out loud. "I want to design houses someday. Real ones." I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd hear the hope in my voice. But my mother didn't even look up from peeling carrots at the kitchen counter. "We don't have the budget for that. Your sister's dance classes come first this year." Dad chimed in with a sympathetic shrug, as though refusing me was the natural order of things. That night, I sat on my bedroom floor, looking at the camp brochure until the paper edges curled beneath my fingers. By morning, I had quietly thrown it away. It wasn't that Brianna tried to overshadow me, she didn't need to. The spotlight followed her naturally, and she basked in it with ease. She wasn't malicious. She was simply used to being adored. And I was used to being the one asked to understand why she mattered more. Over time, I learned to make myself small so she could shine without competition. I stopped mentioning when I got good grades. I tucked away sketches I wanted to show someone. I took on chores without being asked, thinking maybe helpfulness could earn me what brilliance never did: attention. But the attention never came. Instead, I found solace in the quieter corners of life: the library, the construction aisle of the hardware store, the stack of architecture magazines at the supermarket I couldn't afford to buy. I spent hours watching HGTV reruns, tracing the outline of cabins and lofts with my finger against the screen, imagining what I would do differently. I filled notebooks with rough floor plans, roof pitches, and imaginary elevations. Sometimes I'd sneak into the backyard shed after dinner, stack old cardboard boxes, and build miniature houses with masking tape and scissors. None of it was useful, according to my parents. But it was mine. It was the only place in my world where I wasn't competing with Brianna for the right to exist. Some nights, I'd sit on the old swing set behind our house, listening to laughter drift through the windows, the kind reserved for Brianna's stories, Brianna's jokes, Brianna's triumphs, and wonder if maybe I just wasn't meant to be special. Maybe I was the logistical daughter, the dependable one, the steady one, the one who didn't need cheering at recitals or balloons for birthdays, the one they assumed would always figure things out alone. And eventually, I did. But I learned something else too. When you grow up being pushed out of the center long enough, you stop trying to sit there. You start dreaming of building your own space instead. One where no one can tell you that you don't belong. I didn't know it then, but those long evenings sketching by the dim light of my bedside lamp were the first steps toward the life I have now. The life that led me to a mountain estate wrapped in glass and pine. The life my parents never imagined for me because they didn't think to look closely enough. But back then, I was just a girl with a pencil, a dream no one cared about, and a quiet promise to myself. One day, I will build something they can't ignore. By the time I reached my early teens, I had already learned a core truth about my place in our household. Anything I wanted, I would have to build or earn myself. My parents never said those words directly, but the lesson was carved into every small decision they made. So at 14, while most of my classmates were spending weekends at the mall or at sleepovers, I was wiping down tables at the local cafe, stocking shelves at the hardware store, and stuffing tip money into a shoebox under my bed. I told myself it was for school supplies and sketchbooks, but really, It was for the freedom of not having to ask my parents for anything that might be compared to what they readily gave Brianna. I remember one particular afternoon, my hands still stained with the smell of espresso, walking past the boutique downtown where my mother was helping Brianna pick out a dress for yet another semi-formal dance. Through the window, I saw my sister twirl in a glittery navy gown while my mom clasped her hands together with delight. Dad stood behind them, smiling proudly as if admiring a masterpiece. And there I was outside, wearing a second-hand hoodie with frayed sleeves, knowing full well that if I wanted something nice for myself, it would come from the clearance bin or from my own sewing kit. I didn't resent Brianna. She didn't force any of this, but I resented how invisible I became in the glow that surrounded her. Back home, when Brianna's new dress was laid gently across her bed like a prized artifact, I sat at my tiny sewing machine in the corner of our shared room, hemming thrift store jeans and patching holes in my backpack. My mom peeked in at one point, holding the dress up proudly. "Isn't it stunning? We found it on sale for only $200. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Harper, do you think you could wear something you already have for your field trip next week? Money's a bit tight this month." Money was always tight for me, never for Brianna. Still, I kept my head down and worked. Every shift brought me a little closer to something I couldn't yet name. It wasn't rebellion, not really. It was survival, and the smallest taste of independence. And through it all, my love for buildings, structures, and design kept growing. I sketched whenever I could, on napkins during breaks, on notebook margins during class, on scrap cardboard when I ran out of paper. I didn't know where it would lead. I only knew it made me feel alive in a way nothing else did. One evening during sophomore year, I finally gathered the courage to say it out loud. My parents were sitting at the dining table, Dad sorting bills, Mom flipping through a magazine, while Brianna rambled about an upcoming cheer competition. I waited for a lull in the conversation, then said, "I think I want to study architecture." Both of them paused, just for a moment, before Dad let out a soft chuckle. "Architecture?" he said, as if it were a hobby I'd be done with by next Tuesday. "Why not something more stable? Accounting, maybe. Teaching. You're not exactly the creative genius in this family. Just do something practical and stay close." Mom nodded in agreement. "Brianna might go into performing arts, so it'll be good to have at least one child nearby. Something local would be easier for us." The words didn't just dismiss my dream, they dismissed me. I sat there quietly, feeling the heat rise behind my eyes, and nodded like I always did. But inside, something cracked. Not sadness this time, but defiance. If they weren't going to see me, then I'd go somewhere they couldn't ignore what I became. I worked even harder after that. Extra shifts, more tutoring, more odd jobs, anything that would help me carve a route out of our suffocating little town. By the time senior year rolled around, I had applied, secretly, to multiple universities with strong architecture or design programs. I didn't expect much, maybe a rejection letter printed on thick paper. But then, one afternoon, a large envelope arrived addressed to me, the kind that already feels different before you even open it. Inside was a letter that changed the trajectory of my life, a full scholarship offer from the University of Washington for their design and architecture program, tuition, housing stipend, materials budget, the works. I felt my heart race as I held the paper, reading the words again and again just to believe they were real. When I told my parents, they didn't react the way I'd imagined. There was no celebration, no proud tears, no, "We always knew you could do it." Dad looked genuinely troubled. "Seattle? That's so far away. Brianna will still be here. It would be easier for us if you stayed closer." My mother chimed in without missing a beat. Maybe you should consider the community college here for the first year. Then you can think about transferring. I stood there holding the scholarship letter like it was nothing more than a grocery receipt. For a moment, the old instinct returned. Shrink yourself. Stay quiet. Don't make waves. But I didn't. Not this time. Something inside me refused to bend. Maybe it was all the years of being overlooked. Maybe it was knowing I earned every line of that scholarship with my own hands. Or maybe I finally understood that if I didn't leave now, I would never leave at all. I'm going, I said. My voice didn't shake. Even if it's not easier for you. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't decipher. Annoyance, disappointment, maybe fear of losing the daughter who required no maintenance. Brianna didn't even look up from the magazine she was flipping through, and just like that, the conversation ended. But for me, it was the beginning. When I boarded the bus to Seattle 2 months later, everything I owned fit in 2 suitcases, one filled with thrifted clothes I had altered myself, the other full of sketchbooks, pencils, and a handful of dreams no one at home ever bothered to ask about. As the town faded behind me and the highway opened up ahead, I felt something unfamiliar wash over me: freedom. For the first time in my life, I chose a path without waiting for permission. For the first time, I wasn't the backup daughter or the convenient afterthought. I was just Harper, heading toward a world I planned to build with my own 2 hands. Seattle was everything my hometown wasn't: loud, unpredictable, unforgiving, and somehow exactly what I needed. But the freedom I felt stepping off that bus didn't come with comfort. It came with struggle, real struggle, the kind that tests what a person is made of. My scholarship covered tuition and a portion of housing, but everything else was on me. Rent in the city was laughably high, so I shared a cramped student apartment with 3 other girls, all of us squeezed together like mismatched puzzle pieces. My bed wasn't a bed. It was a secondhand sofa I dragged up 3 flights of stairs with a neighbor I barely knew. Most nights, I'd fall asleep with a rolled-up sweatshirt as a pillow, my sketchbook stacked beside me like a barricade between hope and exhaustion. Dinner was usually instant noodles or whatever leftovers I could pack from the cafe where I worked part-time. When I ran out of money, I'd eat dry ramen like chips, telling myself the crunch made it feel less pathetic. During the day, I attended architecture lectures that left my brain buzzing with excitement: conceptual design, load-bearing structures, sustainable materials. At night, I split myself between 3 jobs: barista, construction assistant for a small local contractor, and freelance 3D artist for anyone willing to pay. Some nights I'd be mixing cement at a job site in freezing rain at 6 p.m., then pulling espresso shots for tired commuters at 8, then rendering cabin layouts on my laptop until past midnight. I lived in a perpetual state of exhaustion, but I also felt more alive than I ever had back home. Because at least this time, everything I was building was for me. My parents hardly noticed any of it. They rarely called, and when they did, the conversation always seemed to circle back to Brianna. Her competitions, her outfit dilemmas, her social drama, her stress. Sometimes the calls started with something like, "Hey honey, do you have a minute?" And for a heartbeat, I'd think maybe they wanted to check on me. But no, it always ended the same way. "Your sister is going through a tough time, sweetheart. If you could help her out with a little money, it would mean a lot. She hates asking." It was ironic. I was living off instant noodles and tips, but they expected me, the daughter who left, to somehow hold Brianna together from 200 miles away. The first time they asked, I was too stunned to respond. The second time, I politely said I couldn't. The third time, I stopped picking up their calls for a while. It wasn't that I was angry, it was that I was tired. Tired of being the dependable one, the self-sufficient one, the one they assumed would always figure it out. After graduation, things didn't magically get easier. I landed a job at a small construction and design firm, a place known for taking on projects that bigger companies ignored. They paid me barely above minimum wage, but they taught me everything the classroom never could. How to read messy, outdated blueprints, how to navigate permit offices where paperwork disappeared into bureaucratic black holes, how to negotiate with stubborn contractors and budget-conscious clients, how a half-inch mistake could cost thousands, and how a single brilliant idea could save a project. Most days, I was the first to arrive and the last to leave, sweeping sawdust off the workshop floor after everyone else had gone home. On weekends, I still freelanced to make ends meet, rendering lake cabins, RV park layouts, shed conversions, anything that paid. Seattle rent didn't care about dreams. Rent wanted cash. And so I worked. Then came the project that changed something inside me. A tiny mountain cabin for a retired couple named Marlene and George. They had saved their entire lives for a small retreat in the Cascades, something modest, but deeply theirs. The budget was tight, the land was rugged, and every design choice mattered. But for the first time, I felt trusted. Truly trusted. They listened when I suggested a wraparound deck to catch evening light. They nodded when I proposed using reclaimed wood for warmth and character. And when it was done, when the last nail was hammered and the final light fixture flickered on, Marlene cried. Full, quiet tears. She hugged me like I had given her back a piece of her youth. "You built our dream," she whispered. "We'll remember you every winter morning we wake up here." Driving home that night, I felt a pride so bright it kept me awake all the way back to Seattle. I took pictures of the finished cabin, golden light glowing through the windows, snow dusting the roof, and sent them to my parents. I didn't expect a parade, but I expected something. Something different from what came a minute later. Mom replied first. "Nice. Anyway, your sister got invited to dance at the regional showcase. Isn't that amazing?" Dad followed with a thumbs-up emoji. A thumbs up. I stared at the messages for a long time. I don't know why I still hoped they would see me after all these years. Really see me. But hope is a habit you build even when it hurts you. That night, I sat on the edge of my sofa bed, scrolling through the photos of Marlene and George standing on their new deck, their faces lit with the kind of joy you can't fake. And I whispered to myself, maybe I could build an entire city, and they'd still only call me to ask what Brianna needs. It wasn't bitterness. Not exactly. It was resignation, a quiet understanding that the recognition I kept waiting for was never coming from them. Not because I wasn't worthy, but because they were simply incapable of seeing value in anything that didn't revolve around their golden child. But the funny thing about hitting emotional rock bottom is that sometimes it's the only place stable enough to build something extraordinary. I didn't know it then, but those years, those sleepless nights, those ignored messages, those cheap dinners eaten in the dark, were laying the steel foundation for everything that came next. I just hadn't realized yet that sometimes the people who overlook you the most are the ones who unintentionally push you toward your greatest transformation. The turning point came quietly, almost invisibly, like most life-changing moments do. I didn't wake up one morning suddenly successful, or suddenly confident, or suddenly ready to build a life on a mountaintop. It happened in layers, over years, until one day the ground beneath me wasn't the same ground I had been standing on before. After 2 years at the small design and build firm, I was recruited by a company in Colorado that specialized in luxury mountain cabins and boutique resort developments. Places so breathtaking they look like postcards brought to life. When the email arrived, I thought it was a mistake. Why would a high-end firm want a girl who used to sleep on a sofa and ate ramen dry? But they had seen photos of the cabin I built for Marlene and George, and that was enough. They flew me out for an interview. 2 weeks later, I packed my life into the back of a dented Subaru and drove across 3 states to start fresh. The new company felt like stepping into a world that matched the dreams I'd been sketching since childhood. The office overlooked the foothills near Boulder, and the workshop smelled like cedar and ambition. For the first time, people looked at my designs with genuine interest. They asked questions, encouraged ideas, and handed me opportunities I'd never imagined having this early in my career. My biggest break came when our firm was approached by a luxury retreat chain wanting to build a series of high-end modular cabins across the Rockies, something sustainable, modern, and immersive. The kind of thing that would show up in travel magazines and Instagram reels all season long. When the CEO asked who wanted to lead the design team, I expected some veteran architect to step forward. Instead, the director turned to me and said, "Harper's vision fits what they want." Just like that, I became the lead designer and project manager for a multi-million-dollar venture. It consumed my life in the best possible way. I spent months traveling across mountain ranges, sketching concepts in icy winds, testing materials, refining layouts, and working with engineers, carpenters, and landscape designers to create cabins that felt like part of the land itself. When the first finished units started going viral online, shared everywhere from architecture blogs to TikTok reels, our entire team was flooded with interview requests. But somehow, most of the media attention funneled to me. Maybe it was the story. A young woman who grew up in a tiny town suddenly becoming the face of cutting-edge mountain architecture. Or maybe it was the designs themselves. Clean lines, panoramic windows, cedar slats, and floor-to-ceiling glass that blended seamlessly into the wilderness. Whatever the reason, when the project launched officially, my inbox exploded. With the firm's appreciation came something I had never experienced before. Money. Real money. Not tips folded in half or freelance checks that barely covered rent, but a substantial bonus, equity shares, and a performance payout that put 7 figures into my account for the first time in my life. I stared at the number on my banking app for nearly 15 minutes straight, waiting for it to vanish like a glitch. I didn't celebrate with my family. I didn't even tell them. I knew exactly how the call would go. "Mom, that's Nike's, sweetheart. Hey, Brianna's thinking about applying for that dance showcase." "Dad, congrats. So listen, your sister's car needs new tires. Could you maybe—" I didn't want my milestone to be another opportunity for them to redirect the spotlight to Brianna, so I said nothing. Instead, I talked to financial advisors, downloaded spreadsheets, read books on cash flow and refinancing, watched hours of real estate breakdowns, and studied how to make money work for me instead of over me. With my savings and bonuses, I bought my first small lot, a cheap, overlooked parcel deep in the foothills. Then another, then a third. I renovated 2 old cabins that came with them, turning them into charming Airbnb rentals. They were nothing fancy, but they generated steady income and taught me everything about property management, permitting, seasonal maintenance, and return on investment. Soon, I wasn't just designing mountain homes, I was building a portfolio. Quietly, efficiently, alone. Then came the day that changed everything. I was walking through the firm's studio, coffee in hand, when I overheard 2 colleagues discussing a newly listed property, a large mountain estate originally built in the 70s, but maintained beautifully by an elderly couple who had decided to move closer to their grandchildren. The moment I saw the listing, I felt a stillness settle over me. It wasn't a feeling of wanting, it was a feeling of recognition. 48 acres of pristine land. Pine forests that stretched out like an ocean. A ridge with a view of the valley that looked almost unreal. A private road. A small, aging cabin with potential. $5 million. $5 million was an absurd amount of money to the girl I used to be. The girl sewing thrifted jeans and eating dry ramen. But to the woman I had become, it wasn't impossible. It was a challenge, a calling, a whisper in the back of my mind. This is yours. I drove out to see the property alone. It took nearly an hour of winding mountain roads before the landscape opened up into something so vast I had to pull over just to breathe it in. I walked the land slowly, listening to the crunch of snow beneath my boots, inhaling the sharp scent of pine, feeling the wind brush against my cheeks. By the time I stood on the edge of the ridge, the sun beginning to dip behind the peaks, I knew. This was it. The dream I had sketched as a child. The home I had imagined while sitting in the dark on my sofa bed in Seattle, the place where my life could finally expand instead of shrink. This is it. I whispered to no one but the mountains. This will be the first place that's truly mine. I didn't call my parents before putting in an offer. I didn't ask for advice. I didn't want the predictable chorus of dismissals. Why something so extravagant? Shouldn't you save that money? Brianna could really use help right now. I didn't want to hear them suggest that maybe Brianna should have her own room on the property, or that I should share this milestone the way I had shared every scrap of attention growing up. So I kept it to myself. My dream. My decision. My land. When my offer was accepted, I signed the papers with steady hands and a heart that beat like a drum inside my chest. No cheers, no balloons, no proud parents. Just the quiet knowledge that the little girl drawing cabins in her notebook had finally built her first empire, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, without anyone noticing. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest triumph of all. Building the estate didn't feel like buying a house. It felt like summoning a world I had dreamed about since I was a kid, sitting cross-legged on the floor with an HGTV magazine that wasn't even mine. Everything I had imagined in those quiet moments, the windows, the wood, the silence of the mountains, finally existed in front of me, waiting for my hands to shape it. The property came with an old cabin, small and dignified, but the land itself was begging for something larger, something that matched the scale of the ridgeline. So I hired a team I trusted from my resort project days, packed up my sketchbooks, and began designing the home that would eventually be worth $5 million, though to me, it was worth far more than that. The first decision was the structure, a modern alpine lodge built from rich Alaskan cedar and reinforced steel bones, with radiant heating running beneath thick planks of timber. The entire front facade was wrapped in glass, floor-to-ceiling panes that framed a sweeping view of the snow valley below. On clear mornings, the light spilled in like molten gold, blurring the line between the mountains and the living room floor. Inside, the great room rose 2 stories high, a vaulted ceiling held up by exposed beams stretched above a stone fireplace that could have fit an entire Christmas tree inside when lit. I found a local craftsman who carved a chandelier from reclaimed pine, its branches twisted into an elegant spiral, holding soft amber bulbs like droplets of honey. When it was turned on at night, the room glowed like a hearth inside a cathedral of wood. The kitchen was the heart of the home, an open concept with black granite countertops, a 10-foot walnut island, and floating shelves lined with hand-thrown ceramic bowls. From the sink, you could see the entire valley, a view so breathtaking I sometimes stopped washing dishes just to stare at it. I designed the cabinetry myself, choosing matte charcoal to contrast with the warmth of the wood everywhere else. The stovetop was industrial, 6 burners and a griddle, because I promised myself I would learn to cook more than ramen in this place. Down the hall were the guest suites, 4 in total. Each room had its own private balcony overlooking the mountains, a small gas fireplace, feather-soft bedding, and reading lamps angled perfectly for the kind of late-night book binges I used to dream about having as a kid. I wanted every visitor to walk in and feel like the room already knew them, like it was waiting for them. Outside, connected to everything, I built a sprawling cedar deck that wrapped around the back of the estate, with railings of black steel and fairy lights woven along the edges. Below, a stone pathway led to a fire pit surrounded by oversized Adirondack chairs. On clear nights, you could see entire constellations reflected in the snow-covered pines. And on the far edge of the deck, closest to the ridge, I installed a hot tub built into the wooden frame, one side open to the mountain air, steam rising into the cold like a gentle ghost. I soaked there alone many nights, watching the fog roll between the trees, listening to nothing but wind and silence. But the rooms that meant the most to me weren't the ones built for guests. They were the ones I made for the girl I used to be. The library was small, but intimate. Shelves lined with books about architecture, design, philosophy, and the occasional cheesy thriller I'll deny buying until the day I die. A leather armchair sat near the window, the exact shade of chestnut I used to stare at longingly in antique shops as a teenager who couldn't afford even a keychain. I placed a knit blanket over the arm, not for decoration, but because I wanted the space to feel like a hug. Beside it was my workspace, a studio with 2 drafting tables, racks of paper, jars of charcoal pencils, watercolor sets, and old blueprints pinned to corkboards. A skylight opened above the room, letting natural light wash over everything. When snow fell, the flakes drifted silently over the glass, making the entire room glow white. It was a place where I finally felt free to create without someone telling me to be practical or help your sister first. Every single detail mattered to me. The softness of the throw pillows, the grain of the wood on the dining table, the exact warmth of the lighting, the thickness of each curtain. I handled decisions contractors usually make without a second thought. But this wasn't just a project. It was a conversation with my past. Every brick, every beam, every screw whispered to the girl who was once forgotten at her own 12th birthday party, "I remember you now." I kept the estate a secret. No posts. No tagged locations. No quick pictures on Instagram. It wasn't vanity. It was protection. My parents had a way of turning even my smallest joys into something about Brianna. My wins became inconveniences, my successes redirected. This home was the first thing I built that couldn't be overshadowed, so I guarded it. The only people who knew were a few close friends, my mentor from college, and the core team building it with me. And that secrecy is exactly what made what happened next so unexpected. During one of our early walkthroughs, half the walls up, tools scattered everywhere, we invited a group of architects and designers from Denver for an informal open house. They wandered the skeleton of the estate, asking about materials, airflow, insulation choices, foundation anchors, and glass reinforcement. Among them was a woman I didn't recognize, short black coat, thick notebook, and a smile like she already knew the ending of the story. She introduced herself as a producer for American Mountain Homes, one of the country's most well-known architecture and luxury living shows. I'd watched it religiously growing up, even when I didn't fully understand the terminology. The host was practically a celebrity to me. The producer walked through the estate slowly, running her fingertips across unfinished beams, pausing in front of the glass facade as if she were seeing a painting. Then she turned to me with a look I'll never forget. The look of someone witnessing a story they want the world to hear. "This place," she said softly, "is special. It deserves a full feature. I'd like to pitch it for our season finale." My breath snagged in my throat. A season finale of a national architecture show, my estate, my story. She slid her card into my hand as the afternoon sun hit the glass wall behind her, lighting up the entire room in gold. Think about it, Harper. We want homes with soul. This one has it. And just like that, the world I had built in silence began preparing to speak louder than my family ever expected. I didn't plan a glamorous launch party for my estate. I didn't want chandeliers, rented valets, or a guest list filled with people who only pretended to care. What I wanted was something warm, something human. A housewarming that felt like the opposite of every moment in my childhood, where I stood at the edge of the room, watching everyone else celebrate my sister. So I wrote up a short list. A few coworkers I trusted, the neighbors who had helped me shovel snow the first week I moved in, my old mentor from college, and 2 cousins I still talk to once in a while. And then, after staring at their contact names for nearly 10 minutes, I typed out the message I had been debating for weeks. I'd love for you to come see my new place. It's a bit different from the apartment you're imagining. That message went to my parents, and to Brianna. For a moment, I hovered my thumb over the screen. I could already hear the tone of the conversation if they ever chose to call. Light, dismissive, polite for show, but uninterested underneath. But I pressed send anyway. If family meant anything at all, then they deserved at least the opportunity to see what I had built. And maybe, on some quiet part of my heart I didn't want to admit, I wanted to give them one last chance to surprise me. The response came the next evening. Mom wrote, "We'll see. Brianna's schedule is packed, the kids have activities, and your dad might have a meeting. It depends." Dad followed with a thumbs-up emoji, as if that counted as commitment. Brianna said nothing at all. I tried not to let it bother me. People were busy. I understood. I'd spent years pretending to understand, so I kept preparing. I picked out warm-toned lanterns to hang along the cedar deck, ordered fresh bread from a bakery 2 hours away that delivered only twice a week, set aside a crate of local wine. I placed soft fleece blankets in a woven basket near the fire pit and stocked the kitchen with cinnamon candles and hot cocoa packets for the kids, even though my sister hadn't confirmed they were coming. When the show's producers came the week before to finalize lighting setups and run their last checks, they asked if I still wanted my housewarming to happen before the episode aired. "It'll give the images a lived-in feel," the director said. "Homes look better with human warmth." I agreed, though I wondered if my family would ever contribute to that warmth. Still, I sent them the location pin, a winding mountain road that would take over an hour to climb from the nearest town. 2 days before the event, I sent a gentle reminder along with the directions. The estate felt almost ready, like a stage waiting for the curtain to lift, and I wanted them to be part of the first act. Instead, the reply came at noon the day before the housewarming. My mother again. "We won't make it to your housewarming. Your sister needs some groceries. She's very stressed, and money is tight. You understand, right? We'll visit another time." I read it once, twice. My chest didn't heave or sting this time. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness, as if something inside me had finally given up collapsing and simply turned silent. Groceries. Not an emergency, not a health scare, not a life event. Groceries. A 50-year-old woman with a grown daughter whose kids were both in middle school needed groceries. And that was enough reason to bail on their other daughter's once-in-a-lifetime milestone. Again. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt thick. Suddenly, the flashbacks came, not in dramatic slow motion, but quick, sharp, like flipping through old photographs too fast. The 9th-grade concert where I played violin and scanned the auditorium for my parents, only to get a text saying they were driving Brianna to a birthday party. The day I moved into my dorm carrying half my belongings myself because they had to drop Brianna off at practice. The graduation they missed because Brianna's car broke down and she needed Mom. The promotion dinner they said they would attend, then skipped because Brianna felt overwhelmed. Every time, it was her first. Her needs, her emergency, her priority, and every time I accepted it. I sat down on the arm of the sofa, staring at the message until the screen dimmed. Then I typed back the most familiar words of my life. All good. Take care of her. I added an exclamation point so they wouldn't hear bitterness, even though bitterness tasted like metal on my tongue. My phone buzzed again. Mom sent a heart emoji. Dad didn't reply. Brianna, as always, was silent. For a moment, I let myself imagine an alternate universe where they had said yes, where they were already packing, calling me for directions, excited to see the place I built from nothing. I pictured my mother gasping at the view, my father nodding with approval he'd never given me before. Brianna maybe even whispering, "Wow, you did this?" It was a fantasy carved from longing, not logic. Because in this universe, everything was the same pattern on loop. And yet, the twist none of them knew, the part that made my lips slowly lift despite everything, was that their absence didn't shrink me anymore. If anything, it underscored the truth. They had never seen me. They had never cared to look. But the world was about to. What they didn't know was that my little place wasn't the apartment they pictured with thrifted furniture and secondhand rugs. It was a mountain estate worth $5 million, custom built from the ground up, infused with every dream I had since childhood. And more than that, it was about to appear on a national TV show watched by millions. Strangers across the country would see the home my parents weren't even curious enough to visit. And once the episode aired, my phone, the same phone they only texted when they needed something, was about to erupt in a way it never had before. Their absence didn't break me. It prepared me for the moment my story would no longer be theirs to ignore. The morning the film crew arrived, the estate felt different, alive, almost humming. Frost clung to the cedar railings outside, the valley below still wrapped in a soft blue haze, and the sky had that clean, glassy clarity that only winter mornings in the mountains seem to have. I stood at the front door with a mug of coffee, the steam drifting into the cold, watching the winding road as the vans appeared one by one. The first person to step out was the host of American Mountain Homes, a man whose voice I'd heard 100 times narrating log mansions, cliffside chalets, and off-grid masterpieces. Behind him came the cameraman, a sound engineer wrapped in a thick scarf, the stylist carrying hangers of neutral-toned outfits, just in case, and two producers with clipboards already scribbling notes about angles and light. "Harper?" the host called out with a warm grin. "This place is even more stunning than the photos." For a moment, I felt like I stepped outside my own body, watching this surreal scene. A year ago, I had been living in a tiny apartment, drinking discount coffee and sketching designs on my floor. Today, the mountains behind me glowed like something out of a painting, and a national television crew was about to tell my story. They followed me inside, gasping audibly as the glass facade revealed the entire valley. The cameras clicked on. Microphones clipped. Lights adjusted. A producer guided me to stand by the great room window, my silhouette framed by endless snow-covered pines. "Tell us how it all began," the host said gently. I could have talked about my childhood, about Brianna being the favorite, about the birthdays overshadowed, the graduations ignored, the rejected milestones. But I didn't. For once, I didn't want my story filtered through the lens of what my family didn't give me. I wanted it to be about what I built, what I chose. So I spoke of the early years sleeping on secondhand couches, balancing school and 3 jobs, drafting my first designs with trembling hands. I talked about mentors who believed in me, coworkers who gave me chances, and friends who showed up, again and again, when I had no one else. I mentioned my past only briefly, a soft brushstroke. I didn't have a lot growing up, but I had books, pencils, and a dream that someday I'd build something that felt like home. The host nodded, as if he already understood without me needing to explain the weight behind those words. The crew filmed every corner of the estate: the vaulted ceilings, the stone fireplace, the library that smelled like paper and cedar, the art studio where I still kept my first set of pencils. They filmed me walking through the snow to the fire pit, brushing frost off the deck, opening the doors to the guest rooms prepared with small personalized gifts for the people who mattered. They didn't know the tears I had fought off while choosing those gifts. Because this time, I wasn't preparing rooms for people who would never show up. I was preparing for the ones who had chosen me long before I chose myself. By late afternoon, the house warmed with movement. Cars pulled up the hill, first my coworker Lila, her arms full of homemade lemon bars, then my mentor from college carrying a thick winter coat as a gift. Then 3 of my closest friends from Seattle who had made the 6-hour drive just to be there. My neighbor from the valley below arrived with a casserole dish wrapped in a quilt, apologizing for how simple it is, even though it smelled like heaven. And then the one surprise guest, my Aunt Margaret, on my mother's side, but the only one who ever remembered my birthdays with handwritten cards. She stepped into the great room and froze, looking around slowly as if she had stumbled into a cathedral. "Harper, honey, you built this?" Her voice trembled, and when she pulled me into a hug, I felt something crack open inside me, softly, quietly. Soon the house filled with the smell of food. I had hired a local chef who specialized in rustic mountain cooking: smoky BBQ ribs, roasted vegetables, creamy potato soup simmering in a massive cast-iron pot, and warm apple pie cooling on the counter. Guests wandered from room to room, admiring the architecture, touching the cedar walls, stepping onto the deck just to gasp at the view. The crew filmed the party too, laughs echoing, glasses clinking, snowflakes melting on the fire pit stones. At one point, I saw the host step back and murmur to a producer, "This is the best energy we've captured all season." During dinner, we gathered around the long oak table. The chandelier above glowed softly, painting the room in warm amber tones. People shared stories, my mentor talking about the first day he saw me hold a drafting pen, Lila reminiscing about our days surviving off cheap coffee, my neighbor telling everyone how I got stuck in a snowbank last winter and refused to call for help, but eventually gave up and let him tow my car out. Someone asked about my family. For the first time, the question didn't twist anything inside me. I only said, "They couldn't make it this time." Not an excuse, not a wound, just a fact. A friend lifted her mug of cider. "Well," she said with a grin, "their loss. This is the most soul any home has ever had." People murmured in agreement. Someone else added, "You know, this feels more like home than most homes I've ever been in." I looked around, at the laughter bouncing off the cedar beams, at the warmth radiating from the fireplace, at the people who had crossed miles and mountains to be there. Not because they had to, not because they were obligated, but because they wanted to. For me. And right then, something inside me shifted. I realized I would have ruined this moment if I had spent it wishing my parents and sister were here. This was my family of choice. My people. The ones who filled the room with warmth, who took up space not out of entitlement but out of genuine affection. I stood by the great window for a moment, watching the snow fall softly over the valley, thinking of a lifetime of moments where I had been the afterthought, the backup plan, the quiet shadow beside Brianna's spotlight. Not tonight. Tonight, the mountain was mine. The house was mine. The laughter was mine. And I finally understood that a home doesn't need the people who never show up. It only needs the ones who do. The episode didn't air right away, The crew packed up their equipment, the mountain quieted again, and life slipped back into its gentle rhythm, the kind of rhythm where the sun rises slow behind the ridge and the mornings smell like pine and frost. Weeks passed. I worked, hiked, tinkered with new sketches, refinished an antique table I found in town. The housewarming photos circulated among my friends, and the holiday lights along the deck slowly dimmed as the snow deepened. Life felt settled, peaceful, almost like a secret I was allowed to keep just a little longer. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, as I was reviewing blueprints in my studio, my phone buzzed. It was the producer from American Mountain Homes. Premiere reminder: your episode airs this Sunday at 8 p.m. Get ready. Just those words. No fanfare, no explanation of what would follow. I stared at them for a long second, letting the reality seep in. In 3 days, millions of viewers would see the estate, my estate, broadcast across the country. My voice, my work, my story. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Brianna. I didn't even post anything obvious online. The closest thing to an announcement was a vague Instagram story of the deck view with the caption, "Big Sunday ahead." People reacted with emojis and guesses. Most assumed it was a skiing trip or maybe a date. No one imagined the truth. When Sunday came, snow fell softly over the ridge, quieting the world in that eerie, magical winter hush. I made myself a cup of hot chocolate, pulled a blanket over my lap, and sat on the floor of the great room, facing the massive television mounted above the stone fireplace. At exactly 8 p.m., the screen shifted into the familiar opening music of American Mountain Homes. My chest tightened as the host appeared, smiling into the camera. "Tonight, we're taking you inside a $5 million modern mountain estate perched above the valley outside of Aspen." My heart thudded so loud it drowned out the rest for a moment. Then the montage began. Cameras swept through the estate. The soaring cedar beams, the expansive glass walls, the way the snow glittered across the deck. The fireplace crackled in the shot like it was performing. The kitchen island glowed under warm lights. The library looked like a winter dream. Then the host said my name. Designed and built by 31-year-old architect and developer, Harper Lane. My face appeared. I watched myself smile, calm and composed, as if I weren't reliving a lifetime of bruised memories beneath the surface. I talked about working 3 jobs in college, about nights spent eating ramen on a sagging sofa, about learning finance from library books because I couldn't afford a single mistake. The editors had woven my words with footage of the estate like a storybook. A girl who had grown up shadowed by comparison, now standing in a home she dreamed into existence. But the truly surreal part wasn't happening in my living room. It was happening 900 miles away, in my hometown. In that small Indiana neighborhood, where everything traveled faster than weather, Sunday night TV was practically a ritual. Families kept American Mountain Homes running in the background while they chopped vegetables or folded laundry. And in living rooms across that town, people suddenly froze. I wasn't there, but I've been told versions of the scene from cousins, ex-classmates, and later, even from neighbors who had once barely looked at me. It went like this. A neighbor of my parents squinted at the TV. Isn't that your daughter?" Someone laughed. "No way. That girl built that?" Another voice chimed in. "Wait, that is Harper." In my parents' own home, I imagine the silence hit like a dropped mirror. My mother's spoon clattered against her bowl. My father leaned forward on the sofa. Brianna, perfect, polished Brianna, stood behind them, jaw unhinged. There I was on the screen, speaking calmly about architectural choices, sustainability methods, cash flow strategies, land survey work. They knew none of this about me. They had never asked. The host's voice narrated over a shot of the estate glowing at dusk. This home represents resilience born from years of being overlooked, a testament to building a life without waiting for anyone's permission. My phone buzzed. Once, twice. Then it rattled across the coffee table like it was possessed. First, a Facebook message from a girl who once mocked my boring future. OMG, that's your place? Harper, I'm honestly blown away. Then an old classmate I hadn't heard from in 10 years. I used to tease you. I'm so sorry. Could you give me some real estate tips? More messages piled in. College friends, former coworkers, distant relatives, cousins who hadn't spoken to me since 2014. And then the family effects hit. A text from Aunt Margaret. We are all watching. So proud of you, I'm crying. A group chat ping from the cousins. Turn on Channel 7 now. Harper's on TV. Then, my phone began lighting up with calls. Not from friends. Not from the crew. But from the three people who always claimed to be too busy or too tired for anything that mattered to me. Mom calling. Dad calling. Mom again. Dad again. Then Brianna. I just stared at the screen. The vibrations echoed through the wooden floor. I didn't swipe to answer. I didn't silence it either. I let the phone buzz and buzz, the sound cutting through the great room while the TV showed a sweeping aerial shot of the estate glowing like a jewel in the snow. For the first time in my life, I was the one who didn't show up for them. And the power of that moment, the reversal of it, settled over me like the most peaceful snowfall I had ever witnessed. When the calls finally stopped vibrating in frantic waves, I sat there for a full minute, just breathing, listening to the last echoes of the episode's ending roll across the great room. The snow outside had thickened into a soft white curtain, and the fire crackled steadily, casting amber light across the stone mantel. My phone buzzed again. Mom, for the 14th time. This time, I picked it up. Not from anger, not from guilt, but because I finally felt steady enough to listen without shrinking. I tapped accept, set the phone on the coffee table, and switched to speaker. The estate's vast living room swallowed the sound as my mother's voice burst through. Sharp, panicked, tinged with that familiar mix of accusation and disbelief. Harper, why didn't you tell us? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? The entire town saw it first. People are asking how we, your parents, didn't know our own daughter owns a $5 million home. Her words came out fast, tangled, almost breathless. I sank back into the sofa, letting the soft leather hold me. The fire popped gently, and for the first time, her panic felt distant, like it couldn't find an anchor in me anymore. I spoke quietly, clearly. You didn't know because you never asked. There was a sharp inhale like she had been slapped by the simplicity of the truth. I continued, my voice calm, steady. The last time I tried to tell you about a project I was leading, you changed the subject to Brianna's new shoes. Mom stuttered. That's not fair, Harper. We didn't realize you were doing anything this big. We thought you were still renting a cabin, that this was temporary. A rustle, then Dad's voice replaced hers. Lower, trying for stern but faltering. We just assumed you were keeping things small. We didn't know your career had escalated like this. I closed my eyes for a moment. Assumed. That word summed up my entire childhood. Right, I said softly. Because every milestone of mine has always been small to you, something that could wait, something you could brush aside because Brianna needed something, anything more. Silence on their end, but I wasn't finished. You missed my high school graduation because Brianna needed a dress for her summer program. You skipped my college send-off because her car made a weird noise. When I got my first job in the city, you said you were too tired to visit. But you drove out of state the same week to attend Brianna's boyfriend's birthday? And on my housewarming day, the first home I ever truly built, You skipped it because she needed groceries. The word groceries came out sharper than I expected. The fire hissed, like it agreed. Mom started, "Harper, honey, you're twisting things." "No," I said, still calm. "I'm just finally saying them." There was a long, shaky pause. Then another voice joined the call. Unexpected, trembling but firm. "Harper, dear? It's Aunt Margaret. I'm here with your parents." "Of course." I exhaled softly. That explained the thin, guilty quiet behind them. "I watched the episode," she continued, "and let me say this clearly since no one else has. You earned every inch of that home. You built it yourself. And these two," her voice sharpened, "have some nerve pretending they didn't have a hand in driving you away." "Mother!" my dad snapped, but even he sounded defensive rather than authoritative. "No," she shot back. "You listen. I've watched this family treat Harper like a placeholder for years. Every holiday, every birthday, every event. It was always, 'We'll see if Brianna's schedule allows.' You never made room for both." "Only one." My mother whispered, "That's not true." Aunt Margaret didn't budge. "Then name the last time you showed up for Harper without conditions." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Dad cleared his throat. "We should have been more involved. I admit that. But seeing all this, it's a lot. You could have told us, Harper." "I tried," I said. "For years. But you decided my life wasn't urgent. Brianna's errands were." My mother's voice cracked. "We didn't mean to make you feel second." I didn't let the pain twist my voice. "You didn't mean to. But you did." Another quiet settled. But this time it wasn't defensive. It was the quiet of realization, the heavy, uncomfortable kind where truths land too firmly to ignore. I inhaled deeply. This isn't about punishment or revenge, and it's not about shutting you out. But I need to make something clear. The fire snapped loudly, as if punctuating my words. This home isn't a trophy for you to parade around now that the town has seen it. It's not a photo op. It's the first place in my life where I'm not the backup daughter, not the afterthought, not the one expected to understand when everything is taken away. I let that settle. If you want to be part of this home, it has to be as people who see me, who take interest because you love me, not because you're embarrassed." Mom sniffed, thick with emotion. We are proud of you, Harper. We just didn't realize." "That's the point," I said. "You never realized. Because you never looked." A long, fragile pause. Dad spoke first, voice lower than before. "Can we start over? Maybe visit? Soon?" I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. "There's room," I said quietly. "But not for the version of us we used to be." Another silence, this one softer. Mom exhaled shakily. "We're sorry. Truly. We just want to understand you better." Aunt Margaret murmured, "Good. Start there." For the first time in decades, I felt the scales tip, not in my favor, but into balance, and it was enough. "I need some time," I said, voice gentle but firm. "Let's talk again soon." I ended the call, not abruptly, not angrily, just decisively. Then I leaned back into the sofa, listening to the fire breathe warmth into the great room. Snow fell softly outside, blanketing the deck, the forest, the world I had built. And I realized something powerful. I didn't need their approval anymore. I wasn't begging for recognition. I wasn't waiting for validation that would never come. I already had everything I needed, right here in the home I carved from my own hands, my own dreams, my own quiet determination. And my boundaries weren't walls, they were doors, finally set to open on my terms. 6 months passed in a quiet, steady rhythm, like snow melting into spring, like pine trees thickening with new needles. The kind of passing that doesn't demand attention, but leaves everything softer, clearer than before. The episode of American Mountain Homes lived a life of its own. It replayed on streaming platforms, clipped and shared on real estate forums, stitched into TikToks by architecture students, and reposted by strangers who simply liked the idea of a woman quietly building a dream no one believed she could. My inbox became a strange mosaic, part congratulations, part confessions from people who had grown up overlooked, part desperate gratitude from those who had needed to know someone like them could still build something beautiful. And every time I walked through the estate, I felt a shift. The house was no longer just a house. It was beginning to breathe with the stories of people who found pieces of themselves in mine. I didn't expect the retreat idea to happen so naturally. It began with a friend, Lila, who asked if she could bring her younger sister to stay for a weekend, just to help her reset after a painful fallout with their parents. Then a neighbor's niece, going through a divorce. Then a former classmate who messaged me months after the premiere, saying she needed a quiet place to think. Before I realized it, one weekend each month became a small private retreat. Nothing fancy, nothing commercial. Just a few people sitting around the fire pit at night, sharing stories in low voices, letting the mountains hold what their families had dropped. Sometimes I cooked soup for them. Sometimes we read books on the deck in silence. Sometimes we talked until the stars blurred. I didn't advertise it. I didn't monetize it. I didn't tell my parents. It just became a thing the house did, like it had its own calling. My parents and Brianna changed in slower increments, subtle but undeniable. In the weeks after the episode aired, there had been a frantic edge to their communication, full of urgency and embarrassment. But that phase faded. People in town asked about me now, asked my parents where I lived, what I built, how I did it. And for the first time in decades, Mom and Dad didn't have canned answers. They simply didn't know. And they didn't like not knowing. Over time, their tone shifted. The texts were short, polite, almost gentle. Saw a pretty cabin design today. Thought of you. Hope you're staying warm up there. Dad had a health checkup. Everything fine. Just letting you know. Brianna, too, sent a few stiff messages, not dramatic apologies, nothing theatrical. Just slow, awkward attempts at conversation. Your show was really cool. Did you design that fireplace yourself? If you ever want the kids to see snow, we'd love to visit someday. I didn't open every message, but I noticed the difference. They were no longer speaking from a pedestal. They were speaking from the ground, at eye level. And that mattered more than any apology could. Meanwhile, my own life unfolded with a quietness I adored. I still woke before sunrise. Still walked the property with coffee in hand, still sketched ideas in my studio, cabins, small homes, sustainable builds. I consulted for young designers. Sometimes I taught mini workshops over Zoom about financial basics for creatives. And slowly, I started something that became unexpectedly meaningful, the Homeward Project. It wasn't a nonprofit yet, just a personal initiative, a seed. I partnered with a local shelter to fund security deposits for young adults who had been kicked out or aged out of difficult homes. I helped a teenage girl learn budgeting so she could keep her first apartment. I visited a school to talk about careers in architecture for kids who'd been told they weren't the creative type. Each time I stood in front of them, I remembered the girl I once was, eating ramen, drawing house plans on loose-leaf paper, told to be practical, told that someone else's dreams mattered more. I didn't become anyone's savior. I didn't need to. But I could open a door. Even one door was enough. One evening in late autumn, when the air had that crisp alpine bite and the sky turned gold earlier than expected, I stepped onto the deck just as the valley below sank into shadow. The mountains glowed in soft firelight, the snow reflecting pink and lavender tones. I had a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and a warm mug in my hands. My phone buzzed. Another email. This one from a young woman named Emily. Her words were shaky, raw. My parents skipped my housewarming too, said they were busy with my brother's football game. I thought it meant I wasn't worth celebrating. But then I watched your episode, and I didn't feel alone anymore. I placed a hand against the railing, letting the message sink in. There it was. The thing I hadn't expected when those cameras filmed me walking through my own home. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a map, one that pointed to a truth I wished I'd known years earlier. Being overlooked doesn't mean you don't matter. It means you learn to build your own worth. Brick by brick, choice by choice, dream by dream. I typed back a simple reply. You deserve a home, even if you have to build it yourself. As I hit send, footsteps crunched on the path below, the sound of a car door shutting. I knew who it was before they even appeared at the edge of the deck. My parents. Together. Small. Tentative. They looked at the house like tourists entering a cathedral. No swagger. No superiority. No unspoken hierarchy that put Brianna's world above mine. Just two people who finally realized the daughter they'd underestimated had built something solid enough to outgrow their old narratives. I welcomed them politely. No bitterness. No performative forgiveness either. Just calm. I showed them the living room, the kitchen, the deck, the library. I didn't embellish. I didn't downplay. I just let them step into my world and feel the silence they'd never given me space for. They lingered. They looked around slowly. They whispered more than they spoke. And when they left, there was no dramatic embrace, no cinematic apology. But there was sincerity, and newness, and a strangely peaceful acknowledgement that we were all learning how to be family again, this time without shadows, without golden crowns, without backup daughters. Later that night, I sat again on the deck, watching the last streak of sunlight disappear behind the ridge. The air was cold enough to sting, but the view was worth it. I thought about the girl I once was, the housewarming that never happened, the front doors that had closed on me, emotionally, literally, symbolically. And I thought about this home, mine, lit from within, like a lantern in the mountains. Then I spoke, not to the camera, not to an audience, but to the people who would one day hear this story, the ones sitting alone, rejected, waiting for someone to show up. You don't need anyone to sign your worth into existence, I murmured. Being left out doesn't make you small. Sometimes it's the thing that pushes you to build a world where you finally belong. I looked at the house, warm, glowing, alive. Housewarmings aren't about who arrives, I whispered. They're about the moment you decide you're allowed to have a home. The wind carried the words across the valley, and I smiled. If your family refuses to show up for your milestones, I said softly, remember this. You can still build a home so solid the whole world sees it, even if they choose not to. And someday, your phone might go crazy too. I tilted my face toward the darkening sky. But by then, you'll know you were already enough, with or without their calls.